Welcome back to Bonded Voices. Ooh, newsflash. Does it really even matter? I don't mean to be sarcastic about this, but as we sit and sip on the cup of coffee, what we're going to talk about is the constant bombardment of news. And does it really impact us? And does it need to? I'm Greg.
I'm Ian.
This is Lauren.
So this topic we can all relate with. There are times when someone comes into our office or a friend texts us or something saying, did you hear about so-and-so, this happened on the other side of the earth? And then we think, oh my gosh, that's a tragedy. And it never seems to stop. There's always sensationalism. So what do we really need to pay attention to? What really impacts us?
You know, they don't just do it with news stories, remember, they're doing it with election coverage as well. Every election's the most important election in our time, assault on democracy, this or that and the other. And at the end of the day, I think ever since I've been in the United States, every election has been the most important election of our time.
So it's your fault.
Yeah,
ever since you've been here.
Because I think before that it wasn't. Yeah.
Well, so since the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, there's been this constant need to be in the news with something. Otherwise, they're losing viewers. They've got to do something to keep the eyeballs on the screen. And so they will exaggerate some things and completely fabricate others and make mountains out of a molehill just so they keep the users and the viewers on their channel and not going to go to the fridge to grab a soft drink during the boring parts.
No, you're 100% right. That's been a huge part of it. Because they have to keep people entertained. When we grew up, you had 1 hour news at 5 o'clock at night.
Right.
Well, and think about this. Like, they're so worried about getting people to watch. They'll rush stories that are incomplete.
Yeah.
And, I always go back to the Atlanta bombing, the Olympic bombing, and how Richard Jewell was the subject of everyone's ridicule, and he was the guilty person. The media, the everyone said he was guilty, and then it turns out, it wasn't him. After all, he was a hero, but the retraction was so small you didn't even know about it. And
Right.
there's case after case that the news has jumped onto somebody, and just so they could be out there and have this sensational headline.
Well, the retracting of the news doesn't sell advertising.
No.
It doesn't bring viewers. I'm not sure many of the media anymore actually pride themselves on truth and real. It's always, we're the cutting edge. We're the first station on the scene. We're the first one to report. We're bringing you this exclusive.
Making up a story if they have to.
And I think part of the making up the story is they understand that they can make $1 million by publishing the wrong story and settle for $500,000.
Sure.
With people they've maybe defamed or libeled or slandered. Hey, they're $500,000 ahead of the game.
So is there a delineation between entertainment and news?
Well, so with the advent of the modern day newscaster, which is more of a editorial segment,
absolutely.
It's no longer news. It's no longer fact. And maybe it's just that we, romanticize what we thought news was when we were younger, and we didn't really realize they were doing the same thing back then. But the term yellow journalism has been around forever. So, maybe we just think that the Walter Cronkites of the world back in the 50s and 60s and 70s were telling the truth and not sensationalizing everything.
Do you think they just knew less, though, back then? Just the information was coming from fewer sources, and they probably were more put their trust in those fewer sources than now being able to cross-reference it from multiple different parties?
Well, I think when you have there's fewer sources, so back then you did trust everyone because there was one newscaster that you trusted. Now everyone's rushing because there's 1 million news outlets or citizen journalists out there that are putting out information. So who knows what's real, but we've got to jump on the story and run with it.
Yeah, because I think you can find, whenever you try and research, especially on the web, a story, you can find a million different people giving an account of it, and you think there's no way that many people were involved in it or around it or know it intimately enough. And if you look up even, killer of, just to understand, who was involved with some murder that's on the news, you'll get 5 different names.
Yeah,
at least.
So that whoever's first, that's what they're trying to do, is be the first one on there, not caring if they're accurate.
So the topic here, right, is does it even matter? And I think that's in there in the podcast purposefully, because people get caught up in this. They get emotional about it. They get bent out of shape and scared. And how do we get them to a point where they understand that, or filter what matters and what really doesn't matter?
You want to have everyone involved in the matters of a nation, right? So you want them to think that everything matters, but there has to be some type of, metering of that. So while it is important that, there's a crash on the other side of the country and it may impact us very little over here, we want to be cognizant of that it happened and care for those people, but we don't want to be going, oh my gosh, I've got to change my driving habits because of the pile up in the fog in the Midwest.
I have noticed recently, specific to the cargo ship that hit the bridge, Baltimore, that there were, over the next few days, there were topics discussed in the news on what will the impact be for different parts of the country. And I thought that was very progressive within the media, rather than focusing on, okay, here's another camera view from a different angle, and these are the radio transcripts from some boat a mile away that was listening on shortwave radio. It actually started to talk about, how does this impact us? And that's not often what's discussed in the flash news media of, hey, it looks like this happened over here, but it should not be an impact if you're in this part of the country.
And that's because it became a supply chain issue with that particular harbor being shut down. But when you think about the coverage of that story initially, there was everything from it's terrorism to it was purposely done to the boat just lost all power and was drifting. A million different stories, until they got to the point of understanding what actually did happen. I even heard at first, there were several cars that were on the bridge and plunged into the water. The bridge was actually closed to traffic. They forgot to tell the workers who were working on the bridge to get off, but the bridge was closed, so there wasn't cars driving over it that fell into the water. So again, understanding the full story. Dan Bongino actually has something on his show where he calls it the Bongino rule and admits it's not my rule, is that you don't lead with a story until you have the facts.
Right.
Not just a story to tell.
And I think his approach is a little bit different, though. He has regular listeners on a regular basis, where my opinion of the news channels or the news feeds is they're just trying to get that listener at all costs.
Yeah.
They don't have a dependable pool of listeners. They've got people that are going to the highest bidder or the first bidder or whoever has the shiniest object on the news feed, I'm going to listen to. And so Dan Bongino is in a different category because he has a set group. So he has the luxury of validating these facts.
So is the reason why the mainstream media has these fickle listeners or viewers because they have cultivated a viewership that is only after the shiny little thing?
Yeah.
Whereas Bongino and his audience, it's more about, okay, I want to get more facts, do more due diligence on the story. So could the mainstream media go back to that if they so choose?
Well, I think any organization can do anything they want within reason.
But with their
will
viewers-
they? I don't think so.
Well, think about this. If they would start putting more facts and due diligence, there's a need for it. People like that. That's the reason why these alternate news sources have sprung up. So are they're blind to their own problem?
See, I've always thought a retraction of a story should take up the same amount of space in a publication as the actual story did.
And in the same spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't take 2 pages at the back of the newspaper.
Which they don't. They take a little corner and the inside
Exactly
fold.
right. Exactly.
Where
Well,
no one's ever going to
And
see
they don't
it.
lead with a retraction.
No, not at all.
We're going to spend the next hour or the next 1 minute and 27 seconds talking about how we screwed up.
Well, look at the one of the most recent, and it's not recent. It's probably 5 or 6 years ago. The Covington High School kids
Yeah.
that were maligned, and it was weeks of these kids are horrible. They need to be prosecuted until they found out the true story, and it was just a little blurb that went on the bottom of the screen at the end of a show. Like, so those kids didn't get the retraction, the 14 days of retraction that they had of 14 days of being maligned.
You are listening to Bonded Voices. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast service or on the web at www.bondedvoices.com. Thank you to all our sponsors, and now back to the show.
Now, again, going back to our title, does this really even matter? I think of the Duke Lacrosse story, where that woman accused 4 kids of raping her. A story like that actually does matter, because I thought at the time the reverberation of that story was not only do you have to be super wary around anyone who could, he said, she said, put you in that position of he did this to me or they did that to me, when at the end of that story she said, I made the whole thing up. But these guys their lives were ruined. Mm-hmm. And you thought about how many other men you knew could be in that similar sort of situation or could be accused of that. And so that had a reverberation effect. But when I think of stories like, and look, we live on the east side of Phoenix, shooting on 59th Avenue. 1, it happens pretty regularly. And 2, it's 100 and something streets away from where we are. Does that really matter? Maybe not. And then you take that to another city, another state, another country, another side of the world, and yet we still get at each of those news stories as clickbait. Woman found decapitated, and you go, oh my goodness, where was it? Oh, okay, Venezuela.
So that really brings up with these other podcasts where we talk about endless wars. Do those we're being spun up on things that really don't impact us?
Some of them do, though, right?
Some of them do, but a lot of them don't.
Like when I hear about a plane crash, I don't care where it is. I want to know what type of plane it is. And if it was like a 737 MAX, right? I'll be saying to myself, do I really want to book a flight on a 737 MAX? Maybe not if it's becoming a constant problem. Doors falling off, whatever. I even heard someone on the radio today say they've stopped, every time they book a flight now, they're like, please let it be an Airbus and not a Boeing. Because they're like, there's just too many problems.
Well, there's also been, and I'm not defending either of the manufacturers, but in the same news cycle that was occupied by the local domestic media, very negative Boeing, there was an equal number of incidents of Airbus internationally, but it didn't get the traction here domestically because everybody's in tune with Boeing. And so, again, that's part of the challenge of you see the headline. Do you make decisions based on the headline? And I don't think the intent of the podcast today is to try and create anybody that would be considered heartless, because we're obviously not heartless. We've been sitting around this coffee table for just short of a year having these conversations, and the underlying tone has always been helping men improve their lives, finding happiness. And so our goal isn't to talk disparagingly, nice word there, Greg, about the media. Just more so, let's bring this up as a topic to discuss, because I don't want to come across as heartless, but does it need to impact my life if it is a decapitated human in Brazil?
Right. So there's a certain side of humanity where that hits you home regardless where it is. I think the side of caring is that when it comes to like mental health, depression, fear that gets stoked in people, that you put things in context. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's important about these sort of conversations. It's to help people, to help others put things in context. That I'm afraid to fly now because I heard a door fell off a plane. Yeah, but no one got hurt, and everything was fine.
Well, and it sounds like I'm defending the aviation industry, but it's still statistically the safest way to travel.
It is by a long shot. And again, so there's like squaring that circle, right, around those conversations and putting it in context where it's safe. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think if we can allay fears for anyone with these conversations around looking at the news and being able to conceptualize it and also put it in perspective, I think that becomes super important.
Well, I can tell you that once we got rid of cable and I quit listening to the news altogether, life got a lot better. A lot less things to worry about, because when you're inundated with these things, you do get caught up in them. And when you can just cut that, while it is sad and for a lot of these things that happen, if you can just, again, put it in perspective or just cut out the news. You don't need that much news. If it doesn't affect you, do you really need to hear about it?
I agree. I completely agree with that, Lauren. And Ian hit on a point earlier on mindset. And our news cycle is not good news. The good news doesn't sell advertising.
Yeah.
It's the negative. It's all of the things that allow our brains to go into a dark place. And that really was the precipice of this topic of, from a mental well-being point of view. We spoke recently with Mansheds and the idea of men coming together and finding connection with each other. And in many of these cases, there are groups of men that are volunteering time to help update a park, or maybe it's woodworking projects, or just different things to ignite the positive side of their brains. And that's my concern with this insatiable appetite for dark media that exists in our world.
So we're in a city of, Greater Phoenix is what, 7 million people, 7.5.
Oh, it just increased.
It's even bigger there. Yeah, true. Thanks, California. My brother, who's in New Jersey, sent me a note today saying, "What's going on out there, bro?" About the Gilbert Goons situation.
Sure.
Now, again, Gilbert's a fair way away from where we live. The chances of us ever being involved in that, super slim. But yet, he's joining the dots. Arizona,
sure.
Greater Phoenix.
Right.
Hey, what's going on? I didn't even know what was going on.
Yeah.
Till he takes. But again, it made the news. It becomes sensationalized, and have my brother caring for me in that way. But again, it really doesn't matter.
So I think the Gilbert Goons scenario is a very unique and interesting topic. There's actually been, I think, some positive movement towards, there's certain radio stations locally that spend a lot of time on this topic.
They do.
And what's been interesting is listening to, this morning there was a nonprofit on the phone, or on the radio being interviewed, and they talked about how just what went on developmentally for some of these instigators of these terrible atrocities that they committed. And so there's coming out of this, from what I've paid attention to, is some awareness of what has led to the situation that we're in. Is it terrible information? Of course. Did what they did, is what they did is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form.
Not at all, yeah.
But does it open the opportunity for more conversation around the dinner table?
Not if it's sensationalized and they move on to the next story and then move on to the next
Exactly.
story. Move on to the next
Exactly.
story. You know?
So then there's the challenge within the media of what are we going to dig into? What are we going to
Yeah.
make a 6-part miniseries out of versus is it going to be the boat that hit the bridge? Is it going to be a group of teenage kids killing one teenage kid and beating up a bunch of others? What's going to be that topic? And I'm not so sure that the media is looking at it from the most wholesome human improvement point of view. It's advertising dollars.
Well, and so, and to be honest, if it wasn't Gilbert Goons, a name that kind of rolls off the tongue, I can guarantee that's not the only kid that was killed in a beating by other kids in this valley. It happens a lot more than what there's a lot of murders.
A lot. Right.
And there's a lot rougher neighborhoods, but this is Gilbert Goons.
Yeah.
It kind of rolls off. They've made a story out of it, even bigger story than it needed to be.
See, to me, what also devalues a lot of the news coverage is, and all of us now find news from websites, is that the websites are full of clickbait. Both advertising that looks like news, and then all the very sexualized stuff that they have on there as well. You can't go on a news site at the moment. I don't think there's one out there that doesn't have some voluptuous woman saying something that's right next to a story about some kid being kidnapped. And it's like, who on earth is joining those two things on a site together?
Sure.
Because one devalues the other in a big way.
Well, and to your point, even if you go to the big, heavy-hitting, mainstream media websites, they all have clickbait.
Yeah, all of them. You get it in a feed where you're like, story. Oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, clickbait. It's like, why the hell did I click on that? And it takes away from the story having any validity. But again, back in the day when if a child was murdered in a town, the town would stop.
Right.
That don't happen anymore. Everything just rolls on to the next story, the next headline, the next thing on your social media feed, which is probably the worst because it is so global.
Right.
And a lot of it's so fake.
Well, and the algorithm calculates what you've responded to
Right.
or clicked on before, so it starts feeding more stories that are like that back into your feed.
Yeah.
So it's not. There's no way to get any other type of story because that's the stories that you responded to.
So what takeaways do we have for our listeners on dealing with the news? Some people turn it off completely. Is that the right thing to do? Some people just find a channel that they get it from and it still drives them crazy. I don't know anyone who says, I'll watch the news and I feel great about the information sources of that.
It doesn't matter what political party they're affiliated with. It doesn't matter what media sources they look to. The people that say, I watch the news a lot, are grumpy.
Yeah, I'd say.
So that's the takeaway. Watch less news.
Well, so I would agree with you. However, some of our friends that are sipping on this cup of coffee with us, they have young ones at home. How do those young ones that go to school and come home with these stories? So the turning off the news, while it might be beneficial for someone that might be an empty nester, what about if you've got an 8th grader that's coming home saying, hey, I need to know about this. You want to be ahead of the curve, behind the curve? So I think there's a reasonable amount of news that people should watch, But how do you create that level of, does this pass the sniff test? Is this really as sensational as they're making it?
Yeah.
Do you wait a day to talk about it? Because the kids are going to come home with the latest information. Now, granted, they're looking at TikTok, so however long it takes someone to produce a video on TikTok and put it out there. But I think this is an individualized, what can we do? It does, however, lead us back to one of our very early podcasts here on Bonded Voices that was putting down the phone for an extended period of time to let your brain go through a cleanse. So I guess at this point I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth.
Yeah. See, my advice would be, I think you've got to start very local. Get your news very local, because that's what matters the most to you. Mm-hmm. And then less time on international, and then maybe some equitable time on politics and political world geopolitical news. But I think people really ought to think through how they consume it and what they're reading, what they're getting into, and get rid of the negative ones.
There's been a big push for local food, local sourcing, local manufacturing, and I think local news just fits right in line with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. I'm more of along the lines of just cut it all off, because there's not much good. There's not much in there. I have not been surprised by a lot by turning off the news. Almost 99% of the news I turn off. I don't watch any mainstream news. I'll get my news from websites occasionally. I'm rarely surprised by, oh my gosh, this, and I rarely get excited about, oh my gosh,
sure,
X happened.
Well, let's wrap this with a challenge to our audience. If you have any advice for us on how to dealing with the news and what matters, hit us up on our website, bondedvoices.com, or at any of the sites where you listen and you can interact. And so until next time, I'm Ian.
I'm Greg.
This is Lauren.
And we'll see you again on Bonded Voices.
Hi, this is Ian from Bonded Voices. Each month we will be giving away $100 in gift cards to our fans. All you have to do is register on the bondedvoices.com site and solve the monthly puzzle. It's easy to do, no purchase necessary. Thanks for being a listener.